Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Ask 5. I'm your host, Monica Molinaro, and today I'm joined by Suchi. Do you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Yes. I'm Dr. Suchismita Sarkar, second-year PhD student at Institute of Health Sciences Education, McGill University.
Awesome. So before we get started, do you mind introducing the question that our 5 were asked for this episode?
It's a tricky one. How do you navigate authorship in academic outputs?
I think that's one of the trickiest questions we can ask. So with that, let's see what our 5 had to say.
Yes.
Kevin Eva. I work in the Center for Health Education Scholarship at the University of British Columbia.
So I'm Linda Snell. I am a clinician educator. My clinical work, I'm a general internist. I work at McGill, at the McGill University Health Center. The educator side, I am a core faculty member at the Institute of Health Sciences Education at McGill. And I'm also senior clinician educator at the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada.
Today I'm joined by
Robert Sternszus, Associate Professor of Pediatrics and Health Sciences Education, and Wendy McDonald Chair in Pediatric Medical Education at McGill.
Lara Varpio, I'm a professor of medicine at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania and the co-director of medical education research at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia.
Jacqueline Torty. So I am an assistant professor in the Department of Medicine and a scientist at CERI, the Center for Education, Research, and Innovation. And those are both part of the Schulich School of Medicine and Dentistry at Western University.
How do you navigate authorship on academic outputs?
As an author, I assume you're asking, there's empirical evidence that authorship is the most contentious thing amongst academics. So it's something that has to be handled quite delicately, obviously. I think the right answer is always to try to be transparent at the beginning of any conversation about what are people's roles and what are the expectations to warrant authorship. I try to always abide by the International Consortium of Medical Journal Editors guidelines about what qualifies and what doesn't. And like any guideline, they're fairly loose, but I think it's a matter of making sure that everybody understands that you need to make a substantive contribution, that we're not giving out guest authorship or ghost authorship, that the team that's contributed to the work in a meaningful and scholarly way gets named as authors. And again, if you decide early on that you want to be on the team, then there's workload expectations that come with that, and if you don't, then maybe upset about being left off, but that should be expected because it's meant to reflect nothing more than who actually contributes to and takes responsibility for the work that's being produced.
And I want to pick up on that piece because a little bit earlier you said authorship is for people who contribute in a scholarly way. And I'm wondering if you can expound on that. What does it mean to contribute in a scholarly way?
Yeah. So that component of the guidelines are multifaceted. So there are a variety of different ways you can. I guess the reason I use that phrasing is to say that if I hire a research assistant and they carry out the tasks as I ask them to do it, they're doing work that enabled the project to be done, but it's not scholarly work. They're just following instructions. In those cases, it might deserve an acknowledgement or something, or somebody who's made an impact on the work and enabled it, but isn't really involved in the thinking behind it.
How do you navigate authorship on academic outputs?
I think that's a really important word, navigate, because it does have to be navigated. I've seen so many people who've ended up either not being an author or being an author somewhere in the middle of a pile of people when really they've done most of the work, and they're disappointed, and it hasn't helped them in terms of their career. So rule number 1 is authorship should be discussed very early on, probably in the first meeting of a research team or the first meeting of a student with a supervisor when you're going to do a project. There are some rules of authorship. Used to be the Vancouver rules. I think it's called something else now. But basically it describes who is eligible to be an authorship. It doesn't really tell you about author order. My feeling is that the person who has done the most work and there's a slash in there, which makes it that's where a lot of the challenge comes in, or the person who needs the first author the most should be the first author. It really annoys me when people who have either had very little to do with the project and maybe are just the head of a team or the head of a department insist on authorship and they haven't done enough. And I'll get to what I'll do about that when it happens. But I think usually with discussion, you can figure out, okay, you're going to do most of the work and you're going to do the initial writing, so you're first. The challenge comes because sometimes in medical versus medical education versus education, who's last author and who's second author differs. Who's the most important. Where I come from, last author is often the supervisor, senior author type of thing. And the others are in order of the amount of work they've done, or sometimes the secondary supervisor is second. But it differs and you have to find out what is the culture in wherever you are. So then the question comes, what do you do with people who insist on authorship and you feel they haven't done enough? What I do is number one, show them the rules. Here are the rules of authorship. Eligibility, do you think you fit? And the second thing is for papers now, manuscripts, most of the time people are asked if they actually, they have to sign off. Was I eligible to be an author? There's a flip side to that. I was recently asked, I was actually put on as senior author on a paper. Had I done enough work on that paper to be considered senior author? So I had to go to the main researchers and say, what makes you guys think that I am eligible? In fact, what they did was they said, well, you actually contributed here, here, and here. No, you didn't do the data gathering. You did look at the data and at the analysis. You made important comments and you read the final paper, et cetera, et cetera. So they persuaded me that I should be, whereas I thought I shouldn't. So it works both ways. The challenge is really the senior person who insists on being in on everything. And sometimes if you're a junior author, the first author, you have to get help from someone who's a bit more senior because you don't want to be, there's too much hierarchy difference.
That's how I was going to follow up, actually, was, where does responsibility fall when it comes to negotiating some of these authorship negotiations, particularly when maybe someone that is more senior is insistent on being included when they haven't done the work, or people are kind of moving authorship order around in a way that doesn't make sense?
So just in terms of the latter, authorship order can change depending on what people do. Somebody comes in, they're put a second or third, and then they do basically nothing. They're probably going to get moved down, and vice versa. The challenge is usually with a student who's got somebody who's 2 steps or 3 steps above them in the hierarchy who wants to be an author. And in that case, I would, if you're really concerned about it, I would ask my immediate supervisor what they think about it. And I would go armed with rules of authorship when you do that.
How do you navigate authorship on academic outputs?
Can I say poorly?
I do a really bad job.
I'm terrible at it. But I've learned a lot along the way because you learn a lot from your mistakes. I think really the biggest thing is just being really upfront about it early. It can be a bit uncomfortable, but it's way more uncomfortable to get to the end of the work and have 3 people think that they're the senior author. So that's way more uncomfortable than trying to address it early. I've been in that first situation, where you don't address it and you get the team together and you get to the end and it's like we clearly did not share a vision of how this is going to play out on the author line and people are not happy. So really addressing it up front. That is both around things like authorship order, but also around expectations. Like as you're putting your team together, making sure people know what it is that you're expecting them to do. If you're doing a qualitative study and you're expecting that person to read and analyze every transcript, they should know that up front. If you're not, if you're expecting them to kind of read a few and look at some of the thematic ideas with you and help you play with that, then they should know that too. If you're looking at them for editing and that kind of thing, then they should know that too. So I think being really clear up front about what people's roles are, and that's not necessarily like a first author down type situation. You're not necessarily going into those conversations going, I want you on my team and this is what I want from you. Often it's like I think you'd be great to work with. What role do you see yourself playing in this? But making sure to have that conversation up front, I think, is the most important thing. I have failed to do that over and over and over again, which is why I say I do it poorly. But that's the advice I would give to myself and then not follow.
Of course, right? Do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly.
Yeah. So with that, then, I'm just going to follow up with the authorship mistakes that you've made. Is the big one, I guess you would clarify, is the not having those explicit conversations kind of at the get-go about what roles are. And as you said, like not necessarily in the first email being like, so if you were a member of the team, I would expect that you are third author on every publication. But is it mainly in the mistakes and the lessons that you've learned, is it mainly about having those explicit conversations?
Yeah, it really, it's role clarity for everybody. And it can go in all directions. It can be people thinking that they were going to be more involved than you and maybe thought they were going to be, or less involved. And it sort of misalignments and expectations lead to frustration, right? And frustration is kind of where things break down. And so that for me has been the biggest thing, is just making sure everybody is okay with and clear on the role that they have within a project. Like there's nothing worse than, going into something thinking somebody's going to do something. They don't understand that to be their role. They don't do it. You're frustrated with them for not doing it. You, because, I am so wonderful at hiding my emotions, show that frustration pretty clearly. They don't really understand why I'm frustrated, and it all breaks down from there. So I think really setting those expectations and role clarity are really that's where I've gone wrong in the past, and I think that those conversations are really helpful to have up front. And people have different needs.
That's true. Do you want to talk on that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, it's good not to presume, I guess, what people's needs are in a given situation. There may be somebody on the team for whom being the senior author is actually much more important for that person than it is for anybody else on the team. Or at some institutions, for example, first and second authors are highly regarded. In other institutions, if you're not first or last, it doesn't matter. And so it's also important to kind of understand what the priorities are for the people around the table, and what is helpful to them, what matters, what doesn't matter. And sometimes you can make decisions that way, right? And that's okay too. It doesn't always have to be strictly about like, this is we're gonna do this based on exactly sort of how much you've contributed or what you've contributed. It can really be based on what individual needs are and what matters at different institutions and what part of the career people are in. If somebody's already full professor and tenured and it doesn't really matter to them, it can be much more helpful for somebody else on the team to be in that last author position, that kind of thing. So those conversations can be really helpful.
I have so many opinions about authorship. So in no particular order, I think one of the first things that's most important about authorship, and I'm sure you've heard this from everybody else, is to have the conversation early and explicitly. Make it very clear about what your expectations are and who you're hoping will be first and those sorts of things. And then you have to remember that life will life, and that those decisions, whatnot, will have to evolve and change over time because the project will change. The individuals will have joys or sorrows, and we have to make room. We have to make grace to be human. But I have some opinions about things that we ought not to do. So if you're a senior professor in our community and you've never not put your name on a paper, you've been coasting. This is wrong. And I'm sure people will have opinions about me for saying it, but there's no way, if you have over 100 papers on your manuscript, on your CV, and you've never thought, I wonder if I did enough to contribute. The answer is no, there's some of those you didn't do enough, and you can't do that again. Because it does a number of things. It erodes the quality of what it means to be an author. The other thing is that it sets expectations for what other people can expect for an authorship. The ICGME guidelines are there for a reason. There's one of them that I take really seriously, and it talks about being able to stand behind the integrity of the data. So if I haven't read the data, I have no business being an author, in my opinion. And so that means that I worry that in our field, we have let people stand as authors on our papers for wrong reasons. And sometimes that means they're a senior person. They can bring gravitas to my manuscript. No, step off. That's not right. Be a supporter, be an acknowledgement. Don't stand on the paper. Another thing that happens is that, well, I gave them data. Okay, you don't own the data. You might have supported it, but like, does that really mean that you earned authorship? Was that a significant intellectual contribution? Let's question that. Let's be thoughtful. The other thing is that sometimes people talk about, I want to gift authorship to a junior person. That, well, this person needs more papers for promotion, so I'm going to put them on our author list. I'm really uncomfortable with that because I find it insulting to the person you're gifting. Like, they're competent people. They have skills. They have knowledge. They can do things. What are you saying to them when they're like, I know you need more, so I'm going to give this to you? Like, that's insulting. And if you're not if you don't understand why that's insulting, then that's a whole other discussion. But so if you're a senior member, ask yourself if you really deserve it. If you're there because you brought data, ask yourself if you really deserve it. If you're a gifter or have been gifted, ask yourself if that's the right thing to do. And I think the other thing that really is important is that we need to be selfless on the author list. So I might be able to write the paper in a day, but just because I can doesn't mean that I should author it. That somebody else is going to learn so much skills, is going to gain so much credibility and strength from doing that. Then the right thing for us to do as collaborating authors or senior authors is to support them in that growth and to make it as painless and efficient as humanly possible. And saying, give it to me and I'll fix it, that's not supportive. So one of the things I do when I work with people when they're learning to write is I try to make comments in the, I'm a Word girl. I'm sure there are other platforms. I'm not trying to support Word as a company. But anyway, in Word, there's a comment feature and you can put a little bubble in the margins. I always write, I change this word because, or not always, I try to. I change this paragraph because, or I'm adjusting this order because. I probably don't do it as often as I should, but I aspire to be better. But then that way you understand why I made adjustments. Now I'm actually helping you for your next paper when maybe I'm not there. So I got a lot of opinions about authorship. You probably asked me for something simple like have the conversation, but I have thoughts.
How do you navigate authorship on academic outputs?
It is such a challenging thing to think about and have conversations around, but so important and something that I wish I knew a lot earlier in my career, how to navigate, or at least had some mentorship around how to have those conversations. I think the biggest thing is having those conversations and being transparent upfront. I've learned from, great colleagues of mine who've written papers on this, such as Lorelei Lingard and Chris Watling, have a really nice manuscript on determining authorship order and what that looks like. But I think having those conversations up front and talking about what constitutes authorship in this space. Oftentimes we're engaged with large teams. Teams might include faculty members and research associates or students. And so having conversations with everyone on the team as to what warrants authorship, and what doesn't, so that people are well aware of that going into things. And I always try to offer the opportunity, sometimes people want to be an author on things and other times not. And so giving them the opportunity to say, we're going to be working on publishing this. Is this something that you would like to be an author on? And having those conversations up front and revisiting those conversations often because things change. People's commitments and time change. Their passion for the project changes. The way that they engage changes throughout. And so constantly kind of revisiting that conversation throughout the research project, I think, is really important. And that's all in advance of even writing the manuscript. There's also different etiquette in different fields. So I came from public health sciences, as I mentioned. During my PhD, I did a lot of work in family medicine as a graduate research assistant during my time there. And the authorship order practices in family medicine, even though it's medicine, are very distinct and different from that of health professions education and medical education. So, for example, in family medicine, first author is the most privileged position. And so even if a individual were to write a manuscript, if they weren't the lead PI on the project, or the lead principal investigator that received the grant to do the funding, kind of the brainchild behind the project, they always go as first author. And even if you write the manuscript in full, you would be placed as second author with that person as first, denoting kind of seniority over the project. And when it came to HPE or MedEd, it was very different. The person with kind of the most seniority on the project, kind of overseeing it in the mentorship role, would be considered last author. And in family medicine, that was kind of the worst space to be in terms of authorship order. Not the worst space, it's still authorship, but the etiquette is just a little bit different. And so I'm learning now that, it's about a balance of achieving some of those first authored publications. And as you move on in your career, you're going to have more senior authored or last authored publications. And then I think the tricky part is the in-between. It's so tricky to determine authorship order for, second or third or fourth. Luckily, in academic medicine and health professions education, we're not typically working with teams of like 30 individuals in at lab or a bench science sort of space. So we're often, have a group of 5 individuals that have worked on a project together. But having those conversations is really important, and dictating what the authorship practices in the field are is also really important. More and more, I'm thinking about it because we're working on a project right now looking at grant authorship and the types of contributions that individuals make to grant writing and how and where they're placed in terms of being a principal investigator or a co-investigator or a collaborator on a grant and what that looks like. But it's made me think more deliberately and explicitly about those conversations when we talk about manuscript authorship order as well.
Mm-hmm. So you talked about it as being icky. And when I started the question, I said it's thorny.
Yes.
So why do you think authorship, we use words like thorny or icky, like what about it makes it such a challenging?
I think because in academia or in scholarship, publications are like your currency, right? And no one talking about money is also kind of icky. You don't really like to have those conversations about how much you make or what you do or how you spend your money. And I kind of feel like it's the same way about publications, since that is the academic currency and kind of how you get around. We know that it's competitive in nature. We know that we need to have these conversations. Not everyone might want to have these conversations. But I think the icky part comes from kind of, in a sense, the competitive nature of trying to, especially as you're starting out your career, land a favorable authorship position on a paper, put in the work, and really add value to it. But being able to defend that in a way that doesn't feel icky is really, really tricky conversation to have. But it comes with practice. And sometimes even like for the first couple of papers that I was involved in, I remember having conversations with some of my peers about navigating conversations around authorship with particular individuals that they've worked with in the past, and actually doing like a trial run of my pitch.
Oh, wow.
Of like, you know what, I think I deserve second author, or I feel that this person on this paper should go first, and here's why. And just kind of doing a trial pitch of that conversation to see how it feels, to kind of get rid of that ickiness beforehand, and then to move in.
Okay, Suchi, what do you think?
It was a very nice conversation and a difficult one to recollect all the thoughts, but I think all of them said from their own experiences. They must have gone through all these experiences as students and as supervisors of faculty. There are many pearls of wisdom in that. One is we have to start these conversations. Me thinking about it as a student or a grad student, we have to have these conversations, these difficult conversations, how hard they may be, early on within the research program or the project. I think McGill or IHSE does a very good job to help us with that as grad students. We have a letter of understanding where these conversations are made explicit between the supervisor and the grad student. So they are supposed to kind of come to an understanding with the commitments and expectations required. I think that is very important. But also when we move further in our careers as researchers and early career researchers, we have to navigate these conversations with teams we have not worked with. So role clarity and transparency amongst every one of them is very important. And since we belong to a space where it's an interdisciplinary space and many people come from different segments of life and different disciplines, I guess sometimes it is challenging. Like for myself as well, I come from anatomy background. And for me also, the order of authorship was completely different. Whereas when I have navigated my space into medical education, where we have the last author as the supervisor or the senior most person, but in anatomy, it was completely different. So I think that was something that I had to learn as well. So we must kind of know which are the norms and practices and etiquettes in that discipline when we are doing that research. So I think that's very important. So these are two things that I felt were very, very relevant for us as grad students to understand.
Was there anything else that really resonated for you or things that you thought were particularly interesting?
I think we should not go with a fixed mindset into that. It's actually negotiate the process as our speakers said, because sometimes there are people who may need some order or some positioning within the authorship line, and we should be open to these conversations so that we have cordial relationships in the workplace, I guess. Yeah, that's what human relations are all about, I guess. Not to be very rigid regarding, okay, what the guidelines say and how much and like measuring up the contribution, but more about having an honest and integrity and responsible approach towards this space, I guess. Yeah.
And that's hard sometimes too. Like those conversations, depending on what position you occupy, like as a supervisor, as a student, like those are tricky conversations to have.
Yes. I really resonated when Linda said that we have to always kind of fall back with our immediate supervisor and ask their advice, and also kind of arm ourselves and learn about the guidelines of the space and guidelines which are existing in print, so that we can help navigate these conversations better and also probably practice the pitch. As Dr. Torti said, practice the pitch, because this is academic currency and we have to do it. We have to invest in it for better part of our lives, I guess. Yeah.
And you bring up a really important point in that you can fall back on your supervisor to kind of help out with these things. And I think I just want to add the point that if, as a student, you feel as though you can't have that conversation with your supervisor, the person supervising you, there are guidelines for that purpose to help understand where you kind of fall in the author line, depending on the amount of work that you've done. Because sometimes those conversations might not be broached by a supervisor and may make the situation a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, I can really understand that. But then also understanding the way, the practices which are existing within that space and why certain decisions need to be made. And we cannot have one size fits all for that as well. So I can completely understand. Sometimes it is difficult, but
Yeah. And it felt like everyone had a little, like everyone was aligned, but simultaneously had a bit of a different answer in what they were saying, because everyone interprets authorship order differently as well.
Yes. Dr. Eva was okay, this is because of transparency is needed. And Dr. Vapio was like, because academic integrity has to be maintained. So kind of they were saying, they were all aligned, but they had like different perspectives in that sense.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about in relation to the video?
No, I guess just that just to summarize that, I feel that it is an academic currency, and the more we invest in it, the more benefits we reap. That is why we have to go through the process, no matter how hard it is, discussing authorship and publishing.
I really like the way you summed it up. So we'll leave it there with that. So thank you again so much for joining me, Suchi. I really appreciate it. And everyone else watching or listening, we hope you'll join us for the next episode of Ask 5. Yeah, I think we should. We spent enough time.
We can do this forever.
I know. We spent enough time screwing around. Okay.
What's the worst tagline you can think of for a brand that sells wart removal cream? You can also say pass and we can pick a different one. This is not meant to be the stressful part.
Let's pass on that one.
Okay.
Today I'm joined by...
Try again. I'll get over it. I will. Okay.
Okay. I opened my eyes really wide. That was my fault.
All right.
I just figured maintaining eye contact would make it easier than me being like...
You do whatever you want.
know what I mean?
I'll get myself together now. Okay. I'm ready.
Because I feel like all the time I've had mashed potatoes, like they're lumpy. They're like... Really?
Smooth mashed potatoes are overrated. I think a bit of lump in there.
A little bit of lump.
Green chives.
But what is the worst thing a person can put on their bio on a dating app?
Oh my God. Never dated.
You didn't have to worry about this, did you? Beautiful. See? Easy peasy.
That's it, done?
That's it, done.
All right.
One take wonder. Here, ready to go.
That was actually 2 takes.
That was 2, but that was Dylan's fault.